to this webinar, Economic Development, New Strategies and Best Practices. Today is September 11th, 2013. We're delighted to have such a strong group of sponsors for this program, Cal-ICMA, the California Society of Municipal Finance Officers, and 6 ICMA State Association partners, Colorado, Illinois, Michigan, Oklahoma, Oregon, and Minnesota. They're all banding together to help provide this program to you and the best quality of professional development that we can offer. So this is the 15th year of the CSMFO coaching program, the 10th year of the Cal-ICMA coaching program, and receives additional financial support from the platinum sponsors. You can see there the California Communities Joint Powers Authority, Chevron, Pacific Gas and Electric, and gold sponsors ICMA and the California City Management Foundation, as well as the additional sponsors you see listed on this page, all of whom are banding together to make these sessions available to you without charge. So we appreciate their ongoing support and interest in helping provide best practices and talent development throughout local government in the United States and beyond, as we actually have some people who connect to us from far reaches of Australia, Colombia, and elsewhere. So just a quick overview on the session. Got a lot of key topics in many areas of the country. Redevelopment and economic development are undergoing some major shifts and changes, certainly in California, but also elsewhere. And we're going to look at what are some of the winning approaches that people are using, how could they apply to agencies of different sizes, and how are the roles in local government evolving, and what are we seeing in terms of those developments, and what resources are available to support your local efforts. In that regard, we have an outstanding panel. We really canvassed across the United States to find really interesting and informative presenters for you. So we have Lisa Hill McKay. She's Vice President with Buxton. You'll see biographical background for each of these presenters in the agenda packet, but I just want to highlight she works with communities in California, Arizona, Washington, Nevada, and Texas, so she's looking across a lot of different markets, seeing what people are doing, and we have the benefit of her insights here today, and delighted to get that broad perspective and some new and fresh ideas about what people are doing to be successful in their local communities. We then have Pete Auger, who's the city manager in Auburn Hills, Michigan. Pete has earned advanced degrees at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. He's a credentialed city manager through the International City County Management Association. And he's also vice president of the Michigan Local Government Management Association, one of the ICMA State Association partners for these webinars. So we're delighted that Pete is here to share his perspectives. And then Philip Lanzafame is the Director of Economic Development for the City of Glendale. He is the manager for their Community Redevelopment Program. He then created, as that unwound through the state of California's action, he created an Economic Development Corporation. He's going to share his story with you about that. He has an MPA, also studied at the Kennedy School at Harvard, and has a great depth of experience in working with local governments and local organizations and helping them succeed. So it's a great panel, and we'll be getting some key insights and information from each of them. And I think you'll have a rich tableau of what's happening around the country and what you can do in your local community. So I'm the director of the Cal-ICMA and CSMFO program, Don Maruska, and I'll be handling and moderating the session and the polls and questions along the way. So I encourage you to provide those questions in the question function, and we'll be addressing them as we go. So, in fact, we wanted to get the first polling question, which is we've been encouraging with this program really opportunities for teams to come together and to listen and participate in these webinars as groups so they can be exchanging ideas. In fact, we provide post-webinar discussion questions to stimulate that discussion for you at the end of each of these sessions. So we encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity to learn together, share together, and figure out how you can put these ideas into practice for yourself. So we're going to give a little time for that to happen, and as I mentioned before we started, for those of you that are seeking continuing professional education credit as California CPAs and members of the CSMFO, you'll need to respond to 6 out of the 7 polling questions that we'll have here. But we encourage responses from all of you because that helps everyone to gain some perspective on what's happening and how things are going. So we'll just give a moment more on this. And again, we provide all the materials for these sessions on the websites. You'll get a notification from GoToWebinar at citrixonline.com after this session. It'll be in a day's time about where you can access the recordings and the PowerPoints and the other information that's coming through to you today. So you'll have plenty of opportunities to share this information with your colleagues and to explore it more fully. So let's just take a quick look. We have 3/4 of you attending on your own, and the other quarter at groups of various sizes, including some that are in the 11 to 20 member range. So glad that you're taking advantage of this opportunity to learn together. So I'd like to turn this over to Lisa Hill-McKay, Vice President of Buxton, to share her perspective about what's happening in particular with retail strategies and why she focuses on those for local governments and what is occurring that you can take advantage of for your own agency. So Lisa, if you would please, and I'll turn over the cursor control to you so that you can advance, or I'll help you however you prefer.
Thank you, Don. Hi, again, my name is Lisa Hill. I'm Vice President of a division within the Buxton Corporation called Community ID. We work with about 700 communities across the nation, helping them to really think like a retailer, better understand from a retailer's perspective how to be proactive in terms of recruitment and retention so that they can increase their sales tax revenue, improve quality of life overall for their resident base, and retain existing businesses. A little background about our industry. We are considered the industry leader in consumer analytics and site selection. Essentially what that means to you is we work for about 2,000 retail and restaurant concepts, concepts like Trader Joe's, California Pizza Kitchen, Walmart, Target, H-E-B Grocery, Lowe's. We work with those retail concepts and have for about 20 years, helping them to identify locations. They use analytic data to identify those locations in the heart of specific types of consumers. For companies like Bed Bath & Beyond, we help them with their marketing message. So looking at the right household, targeting them with the right message, direct mail campaign or email advertisement, and also helping a number of different retail and restaurant concepts understand merchandising elements. So what goods and services, what products should have shelf life among their store locations. So not stocking every Target location the same, but really mixing that merchandise based on the types of consumers. So I tell you that to tell you that everything that we do, we take an analytic approach. And this analytic approach in the private sector is really becoming the next generation of data-driven city management, using analytic data to further your own initiatives within your cities. So Don, if you could advance that, please. Let's talk a little bit about retail development today and some of those dynamics and trends. An estimated 78,000 store locations will be open in the next 2 years, according to Retail Traffic Magazine. So we are seeing an uptick in retail trends. We're seeing an 11% increase over the projected 2011-2012 numbers. Small is becoming the new big. So we're seeing, in terms of retail trends, we're seeing in the capitalization on opportunities to exploit new markets. We're seeing shrinking average store footprints. We're seeing retailers not only adapt to urban settings, but also to look at secondary, tertiary, or rural type markets. We're seeing recovering strategies to increase market share, and we're seeing our retail clients really respond to the customer and create that retail experience, if you will. Target, which is a client of Buxton, has introduced a new concept which is about half the size of its current store location today. So that's small becoming the new big. Walmart has also opened stores about 188 square foot versus its traditional 220. And Lowe's has introduced a new smaller footprint prototype to allow for capitalization into untapped urban markets and also immersion into those smaller secondary markets that had previously been overlooked. So if you're in a smaller community, that's good news for you, where retailers are actually shrinking. They're trying to really quantify and better understand that online sales. They're looking to kind of beyond that Tier 1 opportunity and running out of some of those Tier 1 opportunities and really looking at Tier 2, Tier 3 options. Aggressive retail in the industry today include Dollar General, Family Dollar, Subway, KFC, Five Guys Burgers and Fries. The World Wear Project actually expects to open about 650 stores by August 2014, and Teens Discount Zone will open about 400 store locations in that amount of time. So we're looking at over 1,000 locations just among those two retail concepts. Let's talk a little bit about a proactive approach to recruiting and retaining businesses. Where our client cities have been the most successful is to take a retail approach, to really better understand the best practices using analytic data beyond the limitations of demographic information to recruit retail and also to be a proactive partner to its existing businesses, helping them and assisting them utilize the same level of intelligence that a Walmart might use to make a merchandise decision, and really being more proactive in terms of those existing local businesses. So think beyond your demographics. What we know based on our work with over 2,000 retail and restaurant concepts is that your age, sex, race, income, education level tells me virtually nothing about you as a customer. What I want to know from a retail perspective is, are you going to shop in my store? Are you going to dine in my restaurant? For retailers, it's not necessarily about people or rooftops. It's really about your customer profile. So looking at things like your media habits, your lifestyle characteristics, your purchasing behavior. Knowingly or not, as consumers, we're constantly giving away this type of information about ourselves. Think about how you live your lives, your credit card swipes, reward card data, magazine subscriptions, whether you own or lease a vehicle. Buxton is a buyer of that information. There are a lot of different data sources out there that you can access that will allow you to go beyond the 2010 census, which we were excited to get, but by the time we got it, it was about a year and a half old. So look to more aggressive information sources that will allow you to separate consumers from their neighbor. So think about it in terms of you and your next door neighbor. Perhaps you're around the same age, income, ethnicity, both married, both have children, both educated. But from a psychographic profile, from a consumer profile, you probably look very different. BMW, pickup truck, Cheesecake Factory, Chili's Bar and Grill, wine drinker versus beer drinker. So from a community perspective, it's very important to be able to quantify Ben Shaw and Tom King from a consumer standpoint and be able to translate the value of each one of these households back to retail and restaurant concepts that are looking for opportunities in markets like yours. So the annual expenditures on grocery, on retail services, on restaurant concepts, again, be able to quantify that amount, that dollar amount to a retailer so that they can begin to see the value of the customers within your community and within your market trade areas. We also use what's called drive time. Drive time is becoming an industry standard in the retail world, as opposed to using political boundaries, which are not reflective of everyone who shop and dine in your area. We've moved away from, in our methodology, the radial rings. Radial rings do not take into account topographical issues, road networks. So when we begin to think like a retailer and when we teach our communities about that, we're using what's called drive time methodology to better understand the customer, to look at a more accurate picture of the market, to account for density, to account for topographical issues in the road networks, and we also factor in traffic counts. We marry that profile with the specific types of consumers that you have within that trade area delineation. So it's really a matter of saying, what is an accurate drive time trade area for me? Who are the types of consumers in my market? And what is my unique DNA strand according to my customer profile? Then it's a matter of saying, are there retail and restaurant concepts that are currently looking for store locations in markets similar to mine? Do I have enough customers to warrant that store? What does competition in surrounding areas look like? Is there a cannibalization issue? So know that retailers do not want to cannibalize on their existing network of stores. Understand that if there's one within 3 minutes of a location and you don't have a number of customers in that area, they're probably not going to put a second store that close in proximity. Also, working with existing businesses and understanding the gaps in your market, do a leakage analysis. Leakage analysis is very simple. We provide them free of charge, but it allows you to really begin to get a sense of the gaps in your market. So where do you have surplus? Where are you pulling customers from outside of your market? And where are there potential market demand that a retailer could grab? So a surplus means that you have an abundance of customers coming from outside. Leakage means that you actually have a gap in your market for something. That means that your core customers are going outside that trade area delineation to shop or dine. And a leakage analysis will help you really understand in what retail categories those consumers are going outside of that market. It also helps existing businesses better understand, why are they not gaining wallet share? Why are the consumers going outside? A consumer propensity report is also a retention tool. It allows communities to work with their existing businesses. It's a retail category, 32 major retail categories. It's got 4,800 different line items, and it's brands. It's specific to brands. So it separates the residential and the workforce population, and it says, what are the consumers in this market? What are their propensity to buy Nike shoes to Adidas, to drink Grey Goose vodka to Absolute? And it ranks them according to what that core consumer looks like. So once we understand what a consumer looks like and how they behave, we can find other people that look just like them anywhere. We all like to think we're unique as customers, but actually we behave like other customers throughout the country.
Lisa, I might just interject here because I think a question is probably brewing in the audience's mind. That these data and analyses sound very interesting, but I think many agencies local government agencies have thought of these activities as things that the well-heeled, sophisticated retailers are doing themselves. What's changing in the market that's prompting you to advise that local agencies begin to do this? And is this applicable for agencies of different sizes or just for ones that have a really robust economic and economic development staff? What are you seeing about this, and why is this becoming important for agencies to get their arms around themselves rather than count on the retailers to do it?
That's a great question, Don. About 8 years ago when I started with Buxton, we only saw at conferences, at deal-making conferences like International Council of Shopping Centers, there were a lot of retailers attending that conference, brokers and developers, not a lot of cities. We really began to see cities attending that conference around that time. And it's because although retailers will do their own due diligence, and many are our partners in analytic data, communities, it's become very competitive. Communities need to be very proactive in their approach to retail in order to get on that radar screen. So just because a retailer, yes, does its own due diligence does not necessarily mean that they're currently focusing on you. Incentives always seem to play a part, and there are things that you can do that are not monetary but that are customer service related that become an incentive for you. So cities are really beginning to, and have for the last 8 years that I've seen, be much more proactive, and it's that proactive approach that's helping some of those deals happen faster. I'll give you an example. One of my clients in California, Porterville, they were able to recruit a Kohl's. They approached Kohl's. Kohl's said, yes, we're interested in you, but we're about 5 years out. Now, if you're an economic development director, I'm sure you've heard that when you approached a retailer. Yeah, we know where you are. We're 5 to 6 years away. Porterville got that deal to happen in 2 years because they were able to target them. They had the right information. They were able to show market share. They were able to kind of negate some of that negative perception that their income levels were lower or that they were slightly smaller. And they were able to show Kohl's a great opportunity. And Kohl's infilled their empty Mervyn sites. So instead of that deal happening in 5 to 6 years, it happened in 2 because they had the right information and they went directly to Kohl's.
Okay, and just to help calibrate that for our audience, people who may not know Porterville, about what size it is and what location?
Yeah, so Porterville is a mid-sized community. Our smallest community that we work for is probably a little under 5,000. One of my smallest communities is about 2,200 people, all the way to, the San Jose's of the world, the Dallas of the world, the Orlando, Florida. So any community, obviously having different opportunities if you're much smaller, but you all have opportunities for retail. You all have a unique customer profile that you can present. And analytic data can be very useful at, especially for a small community, at overcoming some of those negative perceptions that you're too small. If you limit yourself to demographics and you limit yourself to your political boundaries, and you're only able to show 2,200, then you're gonna have an issue. If you're able to show a market trade area, and you're able to show a much larger area and a much larger, in terms of density, core customer counts, then you've got a better story to tell. And retailers do not care about boundary lines. They care about market share.
Okay. I'm noticing more questions are streaming in, so I want to be sure to give you time to move through your presentation so that we can also cover those questions before we move on to our next presenter.
Certainly. So in terms of the retail development solution, why all the fuss? Because there's an extreme competition among cities, because retail offers multiple revenue streams, and because retailers are loyal only to themselves. So again, this is the need for being very proactive in your strategy. There's a tremendous competition among cities. Customers know no borders. There's a need to minimize retail leakage. Trade areas know no borders, and businesses know no borders. So in terms of multiple revenue streams, the residential offers you a couple of revenue streams, but look at commercial. Commercial gives you an opportunity to check almost every box. And a full-service hotel, obviously being cream of the crop there, and you're able to check every box in terms of your revenue stream. So it is important to have some of that leak or commercial development opportunity so that you can create some of those revenue streams for your community. Understand that businesses is loyal to the dollar. Their decision-making process involves cost of operation, cost of development. They're looking at gross revenue. They're looking at making decisions to open, grow, or close and downsize. So understand that. So having the right information, and this is that example that I used about Porterville, being able to be very proactive and being able to say something at an ICSC conference or a deal-making event. Let's look at this. Hello, Mr. Site Selector. My name is Lisa Hill. I'm the Director of Economic Development for City X. I want you to consider the development on 123 Main Street for your next location, and I'm the retailer. So what? So what have I really told them except that I want them to be part of my community? So really understand the site-specific location factors. Understand from a retail perspective that they're looking at available market share. They're looking at complementary locations. They look at competitors. They look at whether or not there are any cannibalization issues. They look at your traffic count. So if you haven't had a traffic study done, pull those numbers from TxDOT or from Caltrans. Understand volume by direction, by hour of day. Traffic counts are very important to your story. Understand access. Understand site configuration from a planning standpoint. Look at retailers' existing store locations. Are they typically in downtown environments, or are they looking for freeway access? You can tell what a retailer is likely to do if you look at their preferred co-tenants and adjacencies you're able to see a lot of national retailers do want signage. They do want access. They do want high traffic counts. So all of these things, environmental, property tax, development startup costs, these are all site-specific location factors that are being considered on the retail side. You need to understand the drive time. Obviously, the demographics is very important to your story, but also customer profile. Understand psychographic components, expenditures, behavior, lifestyle, and have third-party market validation. So understand that if you can have an industry partner that's well-known and you can have that third-party fact-based information, then you're able to say to the retailer, not only do we think that this location would be great for you, but we've also hired an analytics firm to analyze your existing store locations and showcasing that as a fit. So now let's look at an opportunity with the right information to talk to that retailer. Hello, Mr. Site Selector. My name is Lisa Hill. I'm Director of Economic Development for City X. I'd like for you to consider development on 123 Main. The site's located on the northeast corner of Main and Elm, a signalized intersection with 50,000 cars a day. It enjoys direct access and great visibility. A former service station. The property has been cleared and the seller is motivated. In addition, the site's advantages. According to Buxton, the site is a strong match to your existing locations in our region. It pertains to the type and quantity of your typical and best customers. I'll be sending a customized package that shows our site compared to your company's profile for expansion and customers comparing to your existing store locations. So an overview would be have a strategy. Understand that your sites have specific attributes and understand what those attributes are. Look not only at drive times, but look at primary and tertiary markets. So in a rural market in a small community, you might not just look at a 15-minute drive time. You might look at that tertiary market or that secondary market and look at 20 to 30 minutes and look at that type of consumer as well. Know what the prospect is looking for. What are their site requirements? What are the type customers that they typically locate around? Advice, don't spin your wheels. Don't put incentives toward, a good incentive will not make a bad retailer good for your community. And store locations are harder to fill the second time. And always remember that a no answer is always better than an I don't know. So some of the benefits of executing on a good retail strategy is, again, to increase the sales tax revenue generation, to decrease any retail leakage, have sustainable retail options, improve the quality of life of your resident population, and retain and support your existing businesses long term. Ask yourself, who are you today? What does your city look like? What is your vision? And do you have a strategy to get there?
Okay, great, Lisa. Very encyclopedic view of how local agencies can become more proactive in gathering the information and seeking what they want and what's going to fit for them. And we're going to be moving in a moment to some examples of how cities have gone forward and worked to identify and develop projects that are important to them and valuable to their residents. Before we do, we want to ask a polling question here to see the degree to which people may be doing the activities that you're hearing about from Lisa, and gives you a chance to calibrate where you are relative to your colleagues on this call. We currently have 279 locations participating in this, so a fairly broad group that's participating in this session, so we'll get some significant information from them. While it's happening, I'm just going to cover a few questions that have come in that we've gotten along the way here, so let me just check in. Again, some people are asking about the slides for today. You'll be getting an email if you were the one who registered for this session at your location with all the information about how to get copies of the presentation and of these polling results. So you'll be having opportunities for that. Similar to drive time, is there a data point for walkability that is used? In other words, there's people redefining the nature of some of our communities and how people gain mobility.
Certainly, in tourist and visitor type communities, you can look at walkability factors. It's a matter of tightening the trade area, looking at a 1 to 2 minute versus a 10 to 15 minutes. So that absolutely is customizable.
Okay. And someone here is saying that they're in a relatively small agency, an agency of 10,000 people, and this person is the only economic development professional on staff, and asking where they look for the market analysis like you've identified, and what typically might those cost so that they could get a reading on whether that's within the parameters of what they could manage themselves or budget-wise.
Well, it depends on scope. Some of our our projects range from $5,000 to $70,000. So it just depends on the. It's definitely not a cookie cutter approach. It depends on that community's specific goals and objectives. It becomes a phased project, or at least that's how we do it. I would be happy at the very least to provide free of charge a leakage report, which would get you started and really help to identify some of those areas in which you could grow, and we could take it from there.
Okay. And are there some publicly available sources of information along the lines that you've identified so that people could maybe begin by accessing that and then seeing the degree to which they want to go to more specialized or proprietary databases that you or others might offer?
Certainly, and in California, CalEd is a great resource for information. There are a number of different resources by state, economic development agencies, and a number of ICSD is a great resource for you. And so there are a lot of data sources that you can tap into that are free of charge to at least get some high-level information. If you want to look at customer data and have a granular household look, it probably would require that third-party assessment. But I would reach out, depending in your, where you are in your state, to your economic development groups, and start there and find out what resources are available. Also, offline and after this, I would be happy to provide a number of different websites that you could go to start getting your hands around what that might look like. And the cities, cities, Phil and Pete may have some suggestions on some other resources that they're currently utilizing.
Okay. And in fact, Philip Lands of Fame has some information that's in the agenda packet about some of those resources. So just before we move on, any very quick comment that you have, Lisa, about what you're seeing in terms of what these local agencies are doing?
We're seeing assessment.
So it looks like 45% of them are proactive and focused outreach, 39% are doing some assessment of the competitive position, some are doing some, about 21% doing some analysis, and 42% interestingly have incentives of one form or another. So interesting mix of what's happening out there and what people are doing. And again, these polling results will be available with the agenda packet after this session. So
yeah, I think the incentive is especially interesting because a lot of communities are questioning whether to or not to provide incentives. And when you see that 42% of your competition is providing some of those things, that helps you to make that very tough decision.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Lisa. Now we're going to move to Pete Auger, and Pete is, again, the city manager in Auburn Hills, Michigan, and a vice president of the Michigan Local Government Management Association, which is a partner in these webinars, so we're very thankful for that. And Pete, let me turn the controls over to you here with backup from me at any time you'd like, and we're set to go.
All right, thank you, Don. And boy, turning controls over to city managers, that's pretty dangerous to do. And just to follow up on what Lisa's presentation, it was so well done, is I've used resources like Lisa's in a town as small as 1,200 people with 6 vacancies, and afterwards we used that data and filled up all those vacancies, and it really helps the mom and pops to have the information that the large retailers use all the time. When I was asked to do this and set up this show of an exciting project that we're working on in our downtown, it's a great project with multiple parts, probably around $80 million being invested right now in this economy. The largest part hasn't even come off the drawing board yet, so that'll add to that $80 million total. Auburn Hills is a little bit different story. We're only about 30 years old, and like most communities, when you start out in history, you have an upward trend as we became a city. We have only about 20,000 residents and cover only about 17.5 square miles. Yet company in Auburn Hills employ the third largest amount of industrial employees in the state of Michigan. According to Forbes magazine, we have more Fortune 500 companies run out of our community than anyone else in the state of Michigan, and we're tied with one other community for that designation. Yet, as a newer city, we needed a place that people could call their own, and, you know, like a gathering place for public events and something that really could build our sense of place and identity. This presentation was going to be the story of that project. And for those that want to find out more about this development specifically, you can contact me for that, or if you're at the ICMA conference coming up, track me down and I can do that. Because what happened is, in our rehearsal for this presentation, two things dawned on me. First, 20 minutes is not long enough to talk about and tell this story. And secondly, I realized that some communities might think, quote, that Auburn Hills, that's Auburn Hills, we can't do that in our community type of comment. I'm here to tell you that your community can do or not do whatever it wants. We follow all the state and federal laws. We are hit with the Depression in 2006, just like everyone else, and maybe even more so, because Auburn Hills is 80% business as far as getting our tax base. It dawned on me that there are things that set us apart from most community. And the three things I would like people to take away from my brief presentation today is these three things affect your community: trust, time as a commodity, and attitude. Trust is what we built in our business community, and more specifically with the developers. When we say something, we do it. We attempt only to control what we have control of, but we do take risks sometimes to make development happen. I think that's important, is really focus to control what you can control. You can't control the state and federal governments in your communities, so focus on what you can control. I've run into a lot of people who think everything you do, you need state or federal funding or state or federal programs to get these economic development, to get growth. Trust and honor is something that the state and federal government can't take away from you. Remember, if the state or federal government giveth, they can take it away. So if you build on a core foundation of what you have, they can't take that away. You build trust the same way you do in any relationship. Build those relationships not for immediate gratification, but for long-term impact. The hardest but easiest step is getting out and get to know people before they need you, or conversely, you need them. How has that helped us in our projects? We're in conversations that others were not. Or another way, we were in conversations before others were invited to the table. I'll give you an example. Long-term property owners, a state contacted us about properties that they were, quote, dumping from their portfolio. They wanted to know first if the city had any interest. They really only wanted one thing, well, besides money. They wanted to see that the city would preserve a log cabin their mother moved into our downtown area. So for the price of about one of the properties, we obtained all three. And we lost 2 transit living houses and gained an anchor for a $15 million development. The only way we were able to do this is we built that relationship, and we were trusted to do what we said. We were able to do that without writing an agreement that we would keep this log cabin forever. They trust us. This moves us to the next item that developers really like, and that is time. Again, refocus on what you can control. Incentives are not just what a city can give as far as cash or tax incentives. Time is a commodity that developers appreciate and will trade for. If a company is not in the building, they are not making money, and therefore they're not paying property taxes, which is the fuel on which we live in on a city in Michigan. We have streamlined our process by bringing all elements of city staff to the table very early in the development process. Sometimes the first meeting with a prospective developer, we bring everyone together. This group includes, but it's not limited to, police, fire, city engineer, DPW, your building inspector, community development department, sometimes an environmental expert that we have, the city manager's office. sometimes representatives from the state of Michigan or the county, depending on the proposal we're looking at. Our goal is to have everyone at the table as soon as we can, so developers can get answers as soon as they ask them. We also work strongly with our planning commission, which I think is crucial, and the city council, the elected officials, so they know how important their role is in economic development, and that speed and efficiency means what that means to people who invest money. The difference between managing your decline and controlling your destiny relies on your attitude. Then the big question is, does it work? Absolutely. We used to brag about how fast our team can consistently spit out projects. 45 days is pretty impressive from introduction to project approval. These are projects from around 50,000 square foot new construction buildings to over 300,000 square foot. But 2 months ago I was informed I was misspeaking, so I'd like to correct that. Our average time is now about 35 days. And that is a result of the third thing you can control, and that's your attitude. A good attitude is just as contagious as bad attitudes that you like to get rid of in your organization. It's just done with a little bit more fun. Our quickest site plan review and rezoning project is 27 days, and we've done that twice. This can only happen if everyone is singing from the same hymnal. From your line level employees up through your department heads, the planning commission, as I mentioned before, an elected city council, everyone has to understand that the lifeblood to a city is growth. So you can't stop that growth if you plan to have an ongoing vibrant city. Our staff is used to me preaching from the soapbox that everyone on our staff does economic development, because you don't know who's sitting in that booth next to the line level employee at the Coney Island restaurant and you're talking about the community. Are you selling the city's attributes, or are you selling the city down the river? And sometimes with employees, that's a hard concept to understand, that they're always on the clock, they're always in the public eye. The other two groups that we don't have much control over are residents and developers. But they can be and have been some of our best salespeople. And that happens when you build that trust, treat their time as a commodity that you cherish, and permeate the right attitude amongst your entire team. Now let me show you a couple slides on that project.
Before we do that, Pete, we're going to catch a polling question here about one of the things that you're highlighting, which is who is actively involved amongst our participating agencies on this webinar in economic development, to get a read on the degree to which people are drawing in these different areas of expertise and important contributions in their ongoing activities. So we'll get a quick read on one of your first points here of how important it is to work as a coordinated team from the get-go. And while we're doing that, we'll just take a quick scan at questions that may have popped in and what's coming along in that regard. Some people might be asking, as they're hearing you, that, wow, you must have a very galvanized city council and you know, a community that's well aligned and without divergent views on these topics. Can you speak about that at all? Is this something that, you know, you really have to have all these moons of Jupiter line up in order to work, or is this something that you can do even with you know, diverse perspectives and potentially fractious interests?
We're still human here in Auburn Hills, and we have all types of different personalities on our council and all different views. The strong thing is also building that trust with your council and better yet your planning commission, that we really do our homework, and we ensure by the time the product comes to the city council and planning commission, we push our staff, and our council knows we push our staff to get these projects at one planning commission meeting, not 3. We don't keep bringing people back before the planning commission. As long as the project covers all the bases, you build that trust. You'll notice it starts slowly, but the personalities take a secondary seat to the project.
Okay. Any quick observation you want to make about the response to the polling questions in terms of the degree to which economic development and these other agencies is tapping various components of their organization and their community?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that public safety and public works aren't utilized as much as the planning and general management as far as economic development. And what we found is basically public works and public safety add a ton to good design and projects and site planning. If you just think about the fire trucks, how about design of hallways and stretchers and things, and some of these architects and developers never take really the total life process in the design of these buildings, and our public safety and public works add a lot of value.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. So let's move on and see some examples of how you put this into action.
All right, we start with that log cabin that I mentioned earlier. This is the one the family wanted to preserve, and this photo is actually the one after we took ownership of it and redeveloped it and preserved it. It did need a lot of work. Here is a block of our downtown, and I'll move the arrow. Hopefully you'll see the arrow up here. This is the log cabin, which we call the den, which is the downtown education nook, as we're referring it to. Then on this development is what brought to it. Right here where my arrow is one of the houses we tore down. It was transient living, people moving in and out. And then another one was back here. There was a vacant lot that ran along this side here. This right now is being built. Well, I'll get back to that. Let me see if I can click there. This is a former bar, this university center. What this all here brought to the table was what we call the University Center. And this is where some of our local higher education, Oakland University, Cooley Law School, Oakland Community College, and Avondale Senior High School are scheduling classes. It'll open up this actually for winter term. And right now it looks like we'll have about 400 students per week coming there for classes as auxiliary spaces to the aforementioned schools. So you talk about creating that immediate foot traffic in the downtown that the retailers are clamoring for. That was a great thing that came out of this project of apartments here. Here's the inside of what the cabin looks like after we did some renovations. This space is public space that we designed in marketing as a college town for students to come and hang out. We actually did a survey amongst the college kids, and they actually wanted a place to hang out that wasn't a bar. So this is just going to be public space. You can see a couple fireplaces in there. And with a little bit of imagination and just a little bit of cash, we were able to create, I think, some pretty unique space that the college-age kids like. This is the multi-use 100,000 square foot building. It's moving forward. Actually, even now there's siding on the side. The rest of the outside is done. And the bottom floor here on our main street is going to be retail. You see over on this side is where the log cabin is. It's kind of built around the side. Our TIF district actually put this 3-story parking structure up. So we do use tax increment finance to finance this. This was a 20-year in the making project that they were putting money aside for, and this helped leverage that 100,000 square foot facility there. But growth begets growth. So if you choose this adventure and you get into the attitude and really start moving forward, you better be ready when opportunity knocks, as it did in this area east of our downtown. Site A is closest to our downtown area, and we'll start at where this new growth started is Section C. A large project met its doom in the crash, but that's also becoming the phoenix that's lighting up people's eyes in the region for residential living. We received the vacant parcel after the bankruptcy of the project, and then with Michigan's tax revision process allows the community to obtain property after a 3-year time without the taxes being paid. All we had to do is pay the back taxes on the property, and we were able to sell all. These are single home sites up here, along here, all down in this area where these little homes in the neo-traditional look. There were 48 home sites that were never built out. We sold all 48 of those, and that paid the back taxes that we paid for all of the property. These are the first two that went up. The one on the right is already sold and somebody living in it, and they're negotiating for the one on the left. These were spec homes that were built. Actually, Monday morning I drove by there. The builder put 3 more basements in that are specs and has 2 deposits for 2 others that he's going to construct. That's a great sign of the sale of single home sites, which I mentioned paid for their whole property purchase. A family business came to us, again, talking about the relationships, and this would be in the B section here on the lot. And they were hanging up their shoes and closing the doors. But again, because they knew the city, they wanted to contribute to the city, we still had to buy the property, but we got this property right here, section B in the previous slide, for under what we thought the market had listed it at. For sections A and B, we've already entertained this project right here of 375,000 square foot buildings, which would require a large parking deck that would be built in a phase series. That's not off the drawing board yet. That's not included in the 80,000, or 80 million that we have going in there. But you can see what developers are looking for once that ball starts rolling down the hill. These are just tentatively plugged in here as buildings that could fit on that footprint that we were talking about there. At Monday's City Council meeting, we actually approved a project at $45 million in private investments called the Parkways that are going to be going, let's see if I can operate this here, in this section right here, covering up this yellow section here, which will add about 300 bedrooms in that area there, one being a senior complex, a privately owned senior complex there, and a new boulevard that will run parallel to the Auburn Road there to give us another downtown entrance. And that was just approved Monday night. That looks to be starting in the spring. And if I can catch up there. So just a dozen years ago, this is what our downtown looked around. And I asked the question, has it worked? Is what we've done, the attitude, the trust? I think so. I think the proof is in the final product as we continue to grow. But the bigger issue is what's in the future. And we have, this is the concept of those buildings I showed you before and what can happen. So like I say, the project itself had so many moving pictures, it would be tough to cover in the short period of time, but I'd be happy if you catch me offline, or like I say, at the ICMA conference coming up in Boston, I'll be happy to go over more some of the details and how we were able to pull it off.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Pete. What an amazing story, and what solid values underlie it. While we do another polling question here to get some feedback from people about what's happening in their and what tools they're using and how things proceed in their agency, we're going to be covering some additional questions that have come in. So this poll is basically a poll about asking people to describe what their circumstances are like. You described how you evolved the planning process, the approval process, and the timeliness of things. We're going to see what the agencies that are participating in this are looking at in terms of their activity. And how much did these parameters change from prior times? In other words, was this a community always known for getting things through in a single planning commission hearing and under 45 days, or is this something that was actually quite a change? And how did you bring the change about, if it was a change?
Well, a lot of it is what I think is what leadership or exercising leadership is all about. Number one, we had an advantage as a city that was only 30 years old, but we had a history. We were a township before a city, and there's a long history there. But when you get newer organizations, and sometimes it's not as hard to change your culture, there's still cultural shifts that you have to stay on top of. But the first step is getting your team, your employees, your planning commission on the same page and show them that there is a way to do this. And we're not there to impede growth, because if you impede growth, so I've been in communities where it seems like sometimes maybe a building department wants to charge those reinspection fees. Well, the taxes these companies pay there's no match for any inspection fee that your reinspection fee you're going to charge them. So once you get on the same page, and the goal is to get these companies in there paying the bills, because the residual effect that you can't measure is all those employees who are stopping at the mom and pop stores or the gas station or the Coney Island. That's the residual effect that really helps out.
Okay. And now, in order to develop that kind of trust, it seems to me that, and to support these activities, it seems like you'd need to have some shared vision across the decision makers in the community about what it wants, or an openness and a willingness to do that. How did you go about formulating that? Or did you, or was that necessary? Did it just arise organically and people were on board from the get-go?
Well, our city has had a great staff of technicians when I came back to Auburn Hills, and everyone was very good, and actually the planning process was a good process. But when I came back, it was the time when the recession hit, or the depression, because it was a decade long here in Michigan, and we had a choice. We could manage our decline, or we could control our own destiny, and that's kind of the message that we help deliver to everybody, not only amongst our staff, but amongst the elected officials, that we weren't going to wait for our ship to sail in. We were going to swim out and go get it. And it's that type of attitude that they knew I had the employees back, and they bought into that long-term vision that we can control our destiny if we want.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much. Very exciting story that you're sharing, and it'll be interesting to see what the next chapters are as this unfolds. Is this actually a sketch here of what you think some future development might look like, or interesting how you are projecting this image here?
Yeah, that's actually it's not public knowledge, but it's actually someone that we were working with that may take an opportunity to really take us to the next level.
Okay. And that's, again, using those key elements of trust, time, and attitude that's attracting these opportunities to you, where I gather from what you're saying, those opportunities are coming to you, not to other agencies that are nearby or similarly situated, because you've nurtured and developed those assets for your community.
Well, the occupancy rate for Class A office space in our region is basically 18% vacancy. Our vacancy rate is under 5%, so it definitely makes a difference.
Yeah, you're beating the market by a long shot. Well, great. Congratulations, and thank you for sharing your story here today. We're going to turn next to Philip Lanzafame, and he's the Director of Economic Development. And Philip, I've passed the presentation controls to you, and we're delighted that you're here to share a perspective from California, from a relatively built-out city in California, and how you're seeking to reinvent yourself given the changes that are occurring with redevelopment and other things. So eager to hear your story and your creative ideas about how to rethink traditional public assets.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And much like Pete had talked about in Auburn Hills, Glendale used many of those same techniques with our redevelopment program. But as Don has said, and many of you in California know, we don't have that program anymore. And so I really want to talk about not so much those targeted properties for redevelopment, but how do we rethink our whole approach to public assets and resources and tools. After the Yankees won 4 consecutive American League pennants and World Series titles in the spring of 1953, Casey Stengel, the manager, cautioned his team that they couldn't rely on their past laurels, and simply showing up wasn't going to win the day. What Casey was really saying is we need to rethink our game plan. We had achieved a lot of success in California with redevelopment, but as I said, it's gone. It has been eliminated by our state legislature, and it's not coming back anytime soon. When you add to that some of the effects of the recession, not only that, but skyrocketing costs, certainly in employee costs, many cities they're cut to the bone, and they're very much on the edge. Our governor continues to resist any new tools for economic development, so it really is up to us to change our game plan, to change the way we think about economic development and how we keep our communities vibrant. I want to talk again about a couple of three areas. How do we look at public assets? How's a new way to look at resources, and then a new way to look at tools? The first area that I want to talk about is public assets, and I'm talking mostly about land that we own, parks, libraries, other things that have been in public ownership for a long time. Not necessarily the property that we acquired for redevelopment or that's ripe for redevelopment, but those that have been traditionally held. As I was putting this presentation together, this scene from Beauty and the Beast kept coming back to me over and over again. And I think most of you, if you have grandchildren or children that were around at that time, you know the story. There's a handsome prince. He's not so charming, but handsome, who's put a spell on him. He turns into an animal. And until he finds somebody to actually love him, he will remain in that. Once the petals of the rose are gone, that spell can't be broken. He keeps it under glass. He looks at it. He watches the petals fall off, but he doesn't do anything about it. And he just continues to worry, what is my life going to be? He protects it like it's the most important thing in the world. Now, bear with me. I'm getting to the point on this. Because Belle shows up, and the first thing she wants to do is take that rose out from under the glass. She wants to look at it. She wants to touch it. The Beast jumps on her and says, no, don't ever touch that. This is my whole life. I've got to find somebody to love me before those rose petals fall away. He puts it back under the glass and never really realizes that it's an opportunity to use that asset that he has, that rose, to get somebody to care for him and break the spell. And I think we oftentimes think of our public assets like that rose, that we put them under a piece of glass and we're never going to use them, we're never going to touch them. And as I show on the slide, our conventional wisdom is we're keeping that public land for our grandchildren. Well, then our grandchildren get to our position and they're keeping it for their grandchildren and so on, and we wind up with a lot of stranded value. Now, I did have a council member that went to the other extreme, which I call the kilo option. He said, if our grandchildren want that property, let them condemn it. Let's put it to use right away. Well, I'm not sure that that's the best option, the kilo option. I disagree with the decision then and still wouldn't suggest it to my council. But if you take Casey Stengel's approach, how do we rethink our public assets to look at our objectives, what are we trying to achieve, and how do we use that property to help achieve that asset? So I want to look at, Don, could you advance for me? I can't seem to get the prompt up. A case study, and this is Stengel Field in Glendale. It was built in 1949. It was renamed Stengel Field in 1952 for Casey Stengel, who was a resident of Glendale. It's a great stadium. It is akin to a minor league stadium. The field is 350 down the line, 400 straightaway center, holds 1,800 people. It has full locker rooms that come out into the dugouts, concession stands, and it is just a great, great gem. Many of the users of that are associated with our local educational institutions. Crescenta Valley High School plays there. It's their home field. Glendale College is right across the street. They also utilize the field. The Glendale Angelinos is an all-star wood bat college baseball team, semi-pro team. They use it during the summertime, and then youth baseball, the La Crescenta Babe Ruth, uses it. So the stadium gets a good amount of use from baseball itself, many of the constituents, as I said, are aligned with educational institutions, but they are our constituents as well. Oops. Don, can you help me again and go back 2 slides? We use the field quite a bit. It probably gets 300 days of use between baseball, graduations, TV film shoots. And given our financial situation in Glendale, while we're financially stable, we just don't have the dollars to put into capital improvement and maintaining. And so over time, the field has slowly deteriorated. We were unable to upgrade the concession stands with just standard venting and fire protection, so we've closed them. Organizations now bring their barbecues and they set them out in front and do their hot dog sales for fundraisers. The locker rooms, over 60 years of use and weathered, have started to grow mold to the point where it's unsuitable for people to go inside, so they've been just closed off. Probably the final thing was the bleachers. You can see in the lower left-hand corner of the screen, the bleachers are structurally unstable, and the building official has closed them off. He has allowed the first 2 rows to be occupied, but with the dugouts there, you really can't see, so you're limited to about 40 or 50 seats right behind home plate. Those fences that you see right in here, those are preventing people from using anything else. Effectively, the stadium is closed, and until we get something, some kind of repair to it, it will remain that way. Now, we would typically say this is an ownership issue. We've held this field since 1949. It was part of a land grant from the old Mexican Verdugo family. The city is going to hold this. We're gonna hang on to it. We can't repair it, so we're going to close it. Before, that would be the position that we took. Now we're starting to open up a little bit more and say, gee, we need to change the paradigm. We need to change how we look at these assets. And what can we do to make this field useful and put it in a condition that really makes it a benefit to the entire community? So we have a few options. There's a lot of Major League Baseball players that have played at Stengel Field, whether in high school or one of the college teams that have come through. There's a lot that have a soft spot for it and are willing to contribute to its rehabilitation. One option is to lease it to a nonprofit that will operate it, repair and operate the field, and allow the different stakeholders to utilize the field. They can charge a nominal fee, enough for just their operation expenses, but again, there's a lot of professional baseball players that would be committed to maintaining Stengel Field. The second option is to lease the property to the Glendale Unified School District to do the same thing, repair and operate. The school district has recently issued bonds, and they are able to, they have some cash to rehabilitate it. For the most part, it is their high school that is using the field, and so it makes sense for them to become the operator and manage it and maintain it for the city. When we do that, when we open up a bid and say, are there other ways to achieve our objective, we have several outcomes. The field certainly gets rehabilitated and is put back to use by the same stakeholders that were using it before. There's a long-term security for either entity to amortize those repairs, long-term lease that provides them that security. And then if the city wants to have their grandchildren hold the property, we continue to hold title on the piece of property. So when that lease is over, we get it back. Now this is one example of something we can do. We have several others in the city where we've looked at the objective. The Americana brand is a outdoor lifestyle center. We negotiated for the developer to build 3 acres of open space, park, recreation space in the middle of it. He maintains it. He operates it. but it is available to the community for all intents and purposes as a park. We have another 3-acre property that was a former sanitarium. Glendale had great weather for those suffering from tuberculosis. And we have some historic resources on the site, about half of it. The other half is vacant. So is there an opportunity, rather than the city rehab all of those buildings itself, is there an opportunity for us to sell off a piece of it to build some new compatible housing or other development, take the proceeds and rehab the site? While you may not have full city access and full community access to every property, you do achieve the historic rehabilitation of those, and you do have some limited access to the property by the public. So land is certainly one area. Don, can you advance for me? I can't get up. Some of the other, another area that is resources that we have. I think everybody in some form has government, federal government funding that they utilize. In my example here, I'm talking about home funding for affordable housing. That program is being reduced every year by Congress, right along with our community block grant funds. Yet we still have the same time that we have to spend that money. We were using, in California especially, using those dollars to buy down rents in affordable housing projects to get them to people of very low or low incomes. We were oftentimes leveraging those home funds with tax increment set-aside funds. Those were state redevelopment funds. Now we're no longer able to do that because the program has gone away. It's going to be harder and harder to deploy those assets. Yet we still have those time frames. We also are looking, how do we generate back dollars to backfill those dollars that have been taken away from us by the federal government. So Don, again, I'll need some help there. In Glendale, we had a commitment, we had to commit $1.4 million in home funds within about 60 days or lose them. We had a couple of projects that we were working on that we had already committed home dollars to. And as we started reviewing the pro formas, we noted the first mortgages on the projects. And this was after the traditional assistance. We found that they were of a relatively small amount, and that small amount was making them harder and harder to finance in conventional markets. We started to look at the commitment that we needed to make and the need that those two projects had for first mortgages, and thought, well, why don't we use our home funds and we become the first mortgage lender? We thought about it, didn't know if it had been done before, checked in with HUD, and they said, I don't see any reason why you can't. So we have structured deals to where we will now be providing the first mortgages. It provides some steady income to offset those reductions that we're experiencing in the local or from the federal government. It also gives us some security going forward. We'll be in first position, so if these projects don't pan out, the property comes to us. It's not lost to a market rate project. The property comes back to us, and we can recycle those for other or with other affordable housing owners or developers. In the end, it allows us some flexibility to go even deeper into rents and get to lower incomes if we choose. Or we can use those funds coming in to offset some of the lost and administrative dollars that are required to maintain the program. One of the programs, one of the projects is Veterans Village. It is a 44-unit project with preference to veterans. Really, we're targeting those that are coming back from the two most recent conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. The project had a total cost of about a little over $20 million. We had contributed 4.8 in home funds and found that the first mortgage, little over $1.5 million. So we said we'll use our home dollars to make that and fund that first mortgage. That generates a revenue stream of about $81,000. at an interest rate that's less than market, but more than we could certainly do with our municipal portfolio. In my next example, Don, I need some help again. We have a rehab project. Again, preference to veterans. It's a senior project, so this will probably more likely be veterans from Korea or Vietnam. A smaller project, just under $5 million, with a contribution of $1.5 million. Here, and this one was really tipped us off. This first mortgage of $500,000 was going to be very difficult to get in commercial markets. So we stepped up. We're going to provide it, again, at a lower interest rate, but certainly more than we could generate in our portfolio, a revenue stream of $28,000. So between the two, we generate about $100,000 that, again, we can use to go deeper into rents or to fund our own administrative responsibilities required of the program. And the last area that I want to talk about is tools that we have.
Oh, just before we go there, we're going to do a polling question here, Phil. And thank you very much for opening people's thinking about different and creative ways of using assets. And before we go into an important discussion that Phil has about local economic development agencies and how to use those and create those tools to replace redevelopment agencies that are going away or to do similar work in other communities, let's just take a look at this next polling question here and see how people are thinking about and using assets for economic development, and see what responses we get from the audience about how they're looking at these resources and assets and what might be some creative ways that they're approaching it. And while they are, we'll take a look at the questions that have been coming in and see if we can address some of those as we go along here. Some of them are highlighting back to Pete's presentation about how they're using various kinds of pre-project discussions and gatherings to help people move forward with their projects and help those be successful in new and different ways. So there's a variety of things that are coming forward in that way. What did you find? Did you find any resistance, Phil, to changing use and having different people play roles in this? Either resistance from people in the community, resistance from people at City Hall, or other agencies out there that might be looking askance at turning over the keys, if you will, to some of these assets, albeit on a lease basis or whatever, to different entities?
You know, surprisingly, in both our city council and within our organization, it has just always been a mindset of, those are ours. We're not going to turn them over to somebody else. But we found, I also found the same thing in joint ventures that we wanted to do with the school district. Prior administrations were, no, these are our assets. And while combining resources would certainly get them back to a place where we all want them to be, there was some reluctance, despite the fact that we both share, in the case of school districts, we both share the same constituency. Those students are our constituents as well. So it was very interesting that we've had to go through this really difficult time and get desperate to start to say, gee, there's a different way for us to look at the assets that we have.
Great. So we want to be sure to provide time to get into this local economic development agency idea, but did you have a quick comment about what you're seeing in the polling results here about how people are looking at their assets in new and different ways?
You know, it sounds pretty typical. I think it'll be interesting to see in California, and as we get into the discussion on local economic development corporations, how we present and how we structure any tax credit incentives or rebates, because as I'll talk, the cities can't do that directly because it will constitute debt, which is prohibited from us doing. That is for an agreement over the long term. So I'll be interested to see if that 41% increases over the next few years.
Okay, so let's take a look at the ideas about local economic development agencies and how to advance those ideas.
I think as I have been in this business of redevelopment for the last 20-plus years, I've found that a lot of economic development programs were really based in redevelopment. We were using redevelopment assets. We were using dollars and land to further our economic development programs. It's now gone, and so we need to look at replacing it with something else to effectuate our economic development. Certainly, the local economic development agencies or corporations, they're not a new concept. In fact, there's a lot of agencies right now in California that are operating and doing some really good work with that. But what I found is, for the most part, they're operating independent of any public body. They are private sector sponsored. The boards are not represented by city councils, or if there is some oversight, it's in appointments. A lot of the funding is frequently private sector generated, and while we may have similar objectives and desires, it doesn't allow for the cities themselves to implement their own program and put into place the public policy that they think is right. We know that redevelopment is not coming back. We're looking more now to facilitate projects as opposed to subsidizing them. But we do need some form of tax increment financing eventually if we're going to be successful at all. It's important. We're one of a few states in the country now that now does not have tax increment financing. I think a lot of the principles of redevelopment are still valid, and there are things that cannot be done with a private sector-led local economic development corporation. So we're looking to implement a vehicle for us, an economic development corporation, that really makes the city council puts them in the driver's seat for effectuating public policy. It makes them responsible for the program as well as accountable to the people that have elected them. In looking at developing this agency or corporation, it gives us an opportunity to step away from redevelopment and establish a local program that meets our needs and our rules and is not hamstrung by rules that are coming from Sacramento or from Washington. As Pete had talked to earlier, we don't want to be hamstrung. We don't want to be restricted by those. We want to have a program that meets our needs. And in looking at a new way to implement this tool in your own communities, I would hope that you are able to meet your needs according to the rules that you establish. Now, doing that means you've got to come up with some funding for it. We're looking at the residual redevelopment dollars that will come back to the city as a result of the dissolution of redevelopment. Right now, those were funds that were not coming to our general fund, so we haven't gotten used to getting those all the time. They haven't been incorporated and absorbed into the general fund. There will be excess distributions that are something over and above what we're currently used to. As we restart refunding bonds, and if there's any savings with that, that will add to those tax distributions that come back to the city. Any other revenues that you might have had that are able to be held on to by the city, those are all new dollars that are coming in. And I think it's important to capture those, to account for them, and make sure that they get to the corporation or the agency to help fund that program. And then start to leverage those with entrepreneurial concepts. How can we use our assets and other funding sources to generate revenue for us and to further our economic development program? Again, I think I can't stress enough accounting for those new revenues that are coming because of the dissolution of redevelopment, and then somehow account for them and keep them separately for the economic development program until you're able to formalize that agreement with your general fund as to who gets what money. Many of us in California have been caught up for the last couple of 3 years with the unwinding of redevelopment. And it's certain that the cavalry is not coming anytime soon. Last we heard out of Sacramento was that tools and legislation that gives us new tools will be vetoed by the governor until redevelopment is completely eliminated. That forces us to change the way we think and how we use our assets, our resources, and our tools. I think there's opportunity in the future if we're able to do that. There's growth potential. It's just a matter of changing the way we think about it and finding new ways to win the pennant. So in case you were curious, in 1953 the Yankees did beat the Cleveland Indians, or they were ahead by 8.5 games for their 5th straight pennant. They went on to beat the Brooklyn Dodgers 4-2 for their 5th World Series. Clearly the Yankees were thinking differently.
Thanks so much, Phil. Great presentation. So we want to see to what extent your agency is using a local economic development agency approach and how that's proceeding for you and what you do in terms of the structuring of it. So here are some things that you can respond to along those lines. I do also want to highlight that Phil was very kind to put together a whole page of resources about putting together a local economic development agency, including websites, examples from Glendale's agenda packets, et cetera, that they've used to present and evaluate these concepts, models and samples from elsewhere around the country. And that is available in the agenda packet for today's webinar. It's just right after the opening agenda and the bios and so on of our presenters, and before the set of PowerPoint materials from today's presentation. So you want to take a look at that. We really appreciate, Phil, your initiative in pulling that together. While we're looking at that, we want to make a quick check here on some of the topics that are coming through. One of the things that people are talking about here is, does it really make sense to try to use a targeted rifle shot approach versus a jack-of-all-trades approach in how you address economic development? How much of this is intention and focus, and how much of it is sort of being open to serendipitous opportunities that happen to arise? What's the balance there? What do you see, and how does that work? So some comments from you, Phil, and from others, perhaps, about that topic?
I think Lisa touched on it in her presentation, is being out in front and being prepared, knowing what it is that you're trying to achieve. If you just wait for things to come through the door, I think that you're going to get beat out by other cities. We are all competing. We're all struggling. We're competing for that investment dollar. We're competing for that business. To the extent that you can really define your objective and put some resource to it and achieve that objective and then move on to the next one, I think is a better situation than just kind of throwing a whole bunch of stuff out there and seeing what walks through the door.
I would agree. I would agree with Phil. If you don't know where you're going, you don't know when you arrive. So focus, and then the other stuff, the residual shotgun approach, that'll come, but you got to stay focused.
Okay, great. Let's take a look at the polling results here. Phil, some brief comment from you about what you're seeing in terms of people's experience with local economic development agencies and how they're approaching it?
You know, it doesn't surprise me that 50% that do not have a local economic development agency in their community. I think, again, going back, redevelopment was the driver for a lot of economic development programs, and now that it's gone, I think these agencies are going to become more and more important. As I said, there have been a lot of them around doing good work, but it's not you don't have a lot that are driven by the local entity themselves. Alhambra is a city, a local city here in Southern California that's started to go that route, where the city council is sitting as the board.
Okay, so we have another polling question here, the seventh one and final polling question. We'd like to get some feedback from the audience about how the webinar was of value to you relative to its objectives for today. So we invite you to click off as many of those areas in which you found value as arose. And we also want to highlight in a moment that we'll be featuring the upcoming webinars and where you can access all of the PowerPoints and materials from today's session, as well as these polling question results, so that you can share with your decision makers in your community what people are doing elsewhere. That is something that we've heard over and over from people as being an extraordinary value from these webinars, is being able to see what we have over 280 local agencies participating in today's session, to get a read on what's happening out there and what you can do to benchmark what you're doing with what others are doing, of course recognizing that each place is special and has its own considerations. So we're going to give a moment or two more for this final polling question here, and then going to touch a couple of closing items. Then here just a 30-second wrap-up from each of our three presenters who've been so generous with their time and with their extensive preparation for today, including a practice webinar and other things that they did to help enhance the value for this particular session. So we can see from this that people got lots of value across each of the particular objectives that were identified, and we really thank our presenters for doing that. So as we're moving forward here, want to look at here are the resource locations, and again, you'll be getting this in an email follow-up from today's session. If you were the one who registered on behalf of your location, you'll be getting an email with the information about how to get the PowerPoint presentations and other materials, so it'll be in that email for you. These are our upcoming webinars, so we encourage you to put them on your schedule. They're also available at the websites so that you can take a look at what's involved there. And then here are our wonderful presenters for today. So I'd like to turn to each and ask them to offer a sentence or two of what would be the main takeaway you'd like to offer to the audience today, so that they're able to get the kernel of what you wanted them to hear. So Lisa Hill-McKay from Buxton, what would you like to offer?
Thank you. Yeah, and I would just echo what Pete and Phil have both
whoops,
offered.
if you could speak up just a little bit, it's a little hard to hear you.
Yes, sir. I would just echo what Pete and Phil have both said in their presentations, and that, really hope is not a strategy. Our best cities and our most successful cities that we work with across the country use tools to understand their opportunities. They use private sector intelligence to be on an even playing field. They think in terms of customer density and market share instead of demographic information and rooftops. And they're very creative and very tenacious in their process. And I think both cities have illustrated a number of different ways that you can be creative and very tenacious and positive in attitude. And those are all great drivers of economic development.
Great. Pete Auger, City Manager at Auburn Hills.
Yeah, I just think good governance is based on trust. You build that trust and you can do a lot more than you might think you can do. So exercise leadership at every opportunity you get and build those relationships. And remember that time for developers is a commodity.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Philip Alensafame, a closing comment from you.
I just think that in going forward, especially in California, we just need to think differently if we're going to squeeze every bit of value out of the assets and resources that we have. Put aside the traditional ways that you have deployed these assets before, and think about new ways to do it, and then compare and see what works best for you. And finally, just look for creating new bodies, new types and new ways of doing things, really things that haven't been invented before. Come up with them if that's what's best for your own community.
Great. Well, thank you very much, presenters. And this is Don Maruska on behalf of the Cal ICMA and CSMFO coaching programs and ICMA and our ICMA State Association partners. We're delighted that everyone participated in today's session. And thank you for the expertise that you shared and the insights and questions from our audience, and encourage you to go forth boldly in your economic development activities in your local agency locations. Thanks so much and have a great day.